My brother told the detective I'd been planning this for months. He said it calmly, arms crossed, standing on my mother's front porch while I was zip-tied in the back of a police cruiser. He looked devastated. He looked like a man who had just lost his sister to a terrible secret, and 48 hours earlier, he had been on the phone begging me to do the exact thing he was now describing as a crime. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I want to know who's out here with me. I need to go back to the Thursday before it happened, not because the story starts there, but because that's the last moment I remember feeling like a person who had some control over her own life. I was in my apartment in Columbus, Ohio, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours earlier. I was a nurse. I worked the overnight shift at a pediatric unit, which meant my Thursdays were quiet in the way that only people who work nights understand. That strange in-between stillness where the rest of the world is running errands and you're suspended in a different time zone entirely. I had a book open. I had nowhere to be, and then my phone lit up with my brother's name, and the stillness broke. His name was Theo. 31 years old, married with a 4-year-old daughter, named Poppy. He worked in commercial real estate, made more money than he knew what to do with, and had been the golden child in our family since approximately the day he was born. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it the way you describe weather. It was just the climate we grew up in. Ashley, he said, and his voice was already wrong. Already too tight. I need your help, and I need you to not ask a lot of questions right now. That sentence alone should have been enough. That sentence alone should have been enough. That sentence should have made me put the phone down, finish my coffee, and go back to my book. But I had been trained, for 29 years, to hear those words as a call to action, not a warning sign. He explained it quickly. He and his wife Danielle were having problems, serious ones. She had discovered something about their finances, and she was threatening to involve a lawyer. He needed to move some documents out of their house before she could access them. Physical documents, old partnership agreements, some records from a business deal from 3 years ago that looked complicated, but weren't actually complicated, he said. He just needed them out of the house before she weaponized them in a divorce proceeding. He needed someone Danielle trusted to come over, spend a couple of days with Poppy under the guise of a normal visit, and quietly bring the folder of documents back to Columbus with them when they left. He needed me. Why not Mom? I asked. Mom's too obvious. Danielle watches her like a hawk, but you two get along. She won't think twice about you visiting. And if she asks why you're not there, I'm traveling for work. She already knows that. There were so many holes in this. So many places where a reasonable person with healthy instincts would have said no. But I want you to understand something about being the family fixer. It's not that you can't see the holes. It's that you have been conditioned, systematically and over many years, to believe that pointing them out makes you the problem. Every time I had ever pushed back on Theo, there had been consequences. Not dramatic ones. Just the slow, cold withdrawal of approval from my parents. The eye rolls at family dinners. The way my mother would sigh and say, "Why do you always have to make things harder than they need to be, Ashley?" So I didn't make it harder. I said yes. I drove to their house in Westerville on Friday morning. It was a newer subdivision. The kind where all the houses look slightly like each other, and the lawns are kept to a specific length by a company that sends reminders if you miss a week. Danielle met me at the door in her workout clothes, and she looked tired in a way that went deeper than not sleeping. Not the kind of tired that coffee fixes. I recognized that tired. I had seen it in the mirror after too many years of too many things I couldn't name. She hugged me though, genuinely. "Come in," she said. "Poppy has been asking about you?" Poppy was 4 and had recently become obsessed with dinosaurs, specifically a distinction she found very important between the T-Rex and the Carnotaurus. I know this because she explained it to me 4 times over the course of Friday afternoon. I made grilled cheese. I sat on the living room floor and built a plastic Brachiosaurus habitat out of couch cushions. I watched Danielle move through her own kitchen like a guest in it, careful and quiet, and I thought about what Theo had said. She found something in the finances. I didn't know what that meant yet. I told myself I didn't need to. That evening, after Poppy was in bed, Danielle poured 2 glasses of wine and sat across from me at the kitchen island. She didn't say anything for a long moment. just turned the stem of the glass slowly between her fingers. "Did he ask you to come here?" she finally said. I went very still. "What do you mean?" "I mean, did Theo call you and ask you to come here for a specific reason that wasn't just to see Poppy?" I had rehearsed this. I had the answer ready. But sitting across from her, watching her face, she already knew. She wasn't asking because she didn't know. She was asking because she needed to hear me say it. I didn't answer. She nodded slowly, like I had. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She put her wine glass down very carefully, and then she looked at me with an expression that I still think about. It wasn't anger. It was something more exhausted than anger. It was the look of someone who had already gone through every possible version of a conversation in her head and had arrived at the far side of it, alone. "There's a folder," she said. He called it business records. "Ashley, those documents are proof that he's been hiding money from me for 3 years. Offshore transfers. A second LLC I didn't know about. We have a 4-year-old daughter, and he's been building an escape route for himself since before she could walk." The wine glass in my own hand suddenly felt very heavy. "He told me it was partnership agreements," I said, "that you were trying to use them against him." She looked at me. "He told you I was the one weaponizing things?" It wasn't a question. I sat there with the weight of it settling over me, and I thought about the word weaponizing, how casually he had used it, how it had pointed everything toward her before I'd even walked in the door. "I didn't bring the folder," I said. She exhaled. Her shoulders dropped 2 inches. We talked for a long time after that. About the LLC, about what her attorney had told her, about the way Theo had moved money into a separate account 3 months before their last big argument, the timing of it, deliberate, premeditated. She had documentation. She had been building her own file quietly for weeks, while he thought she was just upset about something she half understood. She was not someone who half understood things. I drove back to Columbus on Saturday afternoon feeling like I had swallowed something sharp. Theo called twice on the way home. I let it go to voicemail both times. When I got to my apartment, I set my bag down by the door, sat on the couch, and stared at the wall for a while. I thought about all the times I'd cleaned up after him. The summer he was 19 and got a DUI, and my parents asked me to say I had been driving because I had a clean record and his future was so bright. The money I lent him in 2019 that he paid back 18 months late and never apologized for. The way he always called me when there was a mess and needed someone who would come without asking too many questions. He called again on Sunday morning. "You were supposed to bring the folder," he said. His voice was different now. The tightness was gone. What was underneath it was worse. "I know what's in it, Theo." Silence. "Danielle told me," I said, "about the LLC, about the transfers." More silence. "And then?" "She's lying. She found those documents and she's going to use them to take everything from me in the divorce. I needed them out of the house so I could get ahead of the narrative with my attorney. Ashley, she is not the person you think she is. You've been hiding money for 3 years. That's not... It's more complicated than that. You don't understand how this works." "Explain it to me." He didn't explain it to me. He said I had betrayed him. He said Danielle had manipulated me, that I had always been too easily influenced, that this was exactly what she wanted. His voice cycled through hurt and anger and back to hurt with the efficiency of someone who had practiced this. And underneath it all, I could hear something I hadn't been able to name for most of my life. The absence of actual concern for me. There was no, "Are you okay?" No. "Did she say something that upset you?" There was only how this affected him, and how I had failed the specific function he needed me to serve. I told him I wasn't going to help him hide anything. He said he hoped I was prepared for the consequences of that decision. I didn't sleep well that night. On Monday, I worked a 12-hour overnight shift, came home at 7 in the morning, and fell asleep with my phone on my chest. I woke up at 2 in the afternoon to 17 missed calls. 3 from my mother, 4 from my father, 6 from a number I didn't recognize, and 4 from Theo. I sat up slowly. My hands were doing that thing they do when something is wrong before your brain is caught up to it. Trembling slightly for no reason I could explain yet. I called my mother first. She picked up on the first ring. "Ashley Marie, what did you do? What are you talking about?" Theo called us. He told us everything. That you went to Danielle specifically to go through their private documents. That you took photographs of financial records to give to her lawyer. That you've been secretly in contact with her attorney for weeks trying to help her build a case against him. I sat very still. None of that is true. Why would Theo make that up? Because I didn't do what he asked me to do. Because I found out what was actually in those documents. And I refused to help him. Her voice went tight in the way I had heard 1,000 times. That particular frequency that meant she had already decided the verdict and was only listening to confirm it. Ashley, he's your brother. Whatever problems he and Danielle are having, that is between them. You had no business getting in the middle of it, and now you've made everything worse. I made everything worse, I repeated slowly. He could lose everything in this divorce if she uses those documents. He hid money from his wife for 3 years, Mom. That is a legal matter and none of your concern. She hung up. I stared at my phone. I thought, I should call a lawyer. I don't know why I thought that before I even knew what I was being accused of, but some part of me that still remembered how to be a person with instincts knew something was coming that I couldn't see yet. The knock on my apartment door came at 3:15. I was still in my scrubs. My coffee was on the counter, and I hadn't touched it. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 people in plain clothes, one with a badge visible on their hip. My brain went completely white. I opened the door. They identified themselves. The taller one, a woman with close-cut hair and a very level gaze, was Detective Osi. The man beside her was her partner. They were with the Columbus Division of Police. They had some questions they wanted to ask me about a matter related to my brother, Theodore Lawson, and they wondered if I'd be willing to come in voluntarily for a conversation. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I had nothing to hide. I know. I can hear myself saying that. I know how that sounds. I sat in an interview room that smelled like a waiting room. Gray walls. A table bolted to the floor. Detective Osei placed a folder on the table between us and opened it without fanfare. Here's what they had. A signed statement from Theo claiming that I had approached Danielle approximately 6 weeks ago. Before my visit, before the phone call, before any of this. Claiming to have information about his finances that I would share with her in exchange for a 10% cut of whatever settlement she received. According to this statement, I had orchestrated the entire visit, coached Danielle on how to locate and photograph the documents, and was being paid for information I had gathered through access to Theo's home office during previous visits. There were text messages, or something that looked like text messages, screenshots of a conversation between a number labeled Ashley and Danielle's number, discussing amounts and strategy and what to ask for. I had never sent those messages. The detective laid them out in front of me one by one. Do you recognize this conversation? Would you be willing to provide your phone for a voluntary search? Can you tell us why you drove to Westerville on Friday when you claimed to have no prior arrangement with the complainant? I sat there and I watched myself start to disappear. Not physically, but I know that feeling now. The way abuse rewires you, so that when authority confirms the story you were raised to believe about yourself, some broken-in part of you accepts it without a fight. I had spent my entire life being told I was the chaotic one, the difficult one, the one who could never just leave well enough alone. And now, there was a detective across a table telling me that my brother had filed a formal complaint, that my mother had corroborated his account, that I had a documented history, according to him, of interfering in family matters. And for about 45 seconds, I sat there and thought, what if I did something I don't remember doing? That is the honest truth of what gaslighting over a lifetime does to a person. It doesn't just distort your memory of specific events. It makes you doubt the basic reliability of your own mind. Then Detective Osi laid down one more piece of paper. It was a printed email. It purported to be from my account to a private investigator discussing fees for surveilling Theo's financial activities and coordinating with Danielle's legal team. My name. My email address. Language that sounded vaguely like me, but wasn't. Slightly too formal. The kind of careful that people do when they're trying to write like someone else. Something clicked. The fog didn't lift gradually. It broke all at once. Like a window. I looked at Detective Osi and I said, I'd like to speak with an attorney before we continue, immediately. I'm not answering any further questions without legal counsel present. She nodded. It's your right. They left me in the room, and alone in that gray box under those fluorescent lights, I went back through everything. the text screenshots, the email, the timeline Theo had provided, the 6-week head start he had claimed I had on the so-called scheme. 6 weeks ago I had been working back-to-back doubles at the hospital. I had documentation of every shift. The email he had fabricated had a timestamp. Timestamps can be verified. The text had been sent from a number I didn't recognize, a number that could be traced. And Danielle. Danielle had her own attorney. Danielle had been building her own case for weeks before I ever showed up on her doorstep, which meant that whatever I had or hadn't done was irrelevant to what she already had. He had framed me as the architect of a scheme I hadn't built, to discredit the information Danielle already possessed, and to create enough noise around my credibility that anything I said could be dismissed. I thought about what kind of person plans that carefully. Then I thought about the offshore LLC, the 3 years of transfers, the account that had been opened before Poppy could walk. I thought about a man who built an escape route that carefully while his wife is raising their daughter, and I understood that I had never actually known who my brother was. My public defender arrived 40 minutes later. Her name was Miss Goddard, Fenwick, and she was calm in the way that people who have seen a lot of bad situations are calm. Not cold, just steady. I explained everything in order. She asked precise questions. She wrote things down. She left to speak with the detectives. She was gone for a long time. Here's what happened while I was sitting in that room. Danielle's attorney had been notified. Danielle had voluntarily provided her own documentation to the detectives, including records that showed she had retained her attorney weeks before I ever came to visit, which directly contradicted Theo's timeline of my involvement. The number from which the text had allegedly been sent was traced to a prepaid phone purchased at a Walgreens in a suburb of Columbus, not anywhere near my apartment. There was footage from the store, and Danielle had also provided something else. A voicemail. Theo's voice, recorded by her without his knowledge 6 weeks prior, during an argument that had gotten bad enough that she had quietly started keeping records. In it, he told her that if she didn't drop her plans to speak with an attorney, he would make sure that her relationship with her sister-in-law, meaning me, would blow up in a way that makes both of them useless. She had kept it because she didn't know exactly what he meant. She kept it because she had learned, living with him, to keep things. Miss Fenwick came back into the room and told me I was free to go. I didn't move for a moment. Theo was not arrested that day. I want to be honest about that, because I know that's the part of these stories where you expect everything to happen at once. It didn't. What happened was slower and less cinematic, and ultimately more permanent. Danielle's attorney filed the voicemail as evidence in the divorce proceedings. The detectives opened a separate investigation into the fabricated texts and email, which led, over the following 3 months, to a finding that Theo had purchased the prepaid phone, had created a spoofed email account, and had submitted falsified screenshots to law enforcement. Filing a false police report in Ohio is a misdemeanor at minimum. Fraud and tampering with evidence are not. He was charged in February. My parents did not speak to me for 2 months after the interview. My father eventually called on a Sunday evening and said simply, "I think we didn't ask the right questions." That was the closest he came to an apology. I told him I appreciated him saying so. I meant it. But I also meant it when I told him that I needed some time before I could have a normal relationship with either of them again. He said he understood. I'm not sure he did, but he tried, and that was different from what I had expected. Danielle's divorce was finalized in the spring. She got the house, primary custody of Poppy, and a settlement that reflected the financial picture that Theo had been hiding for 3 years. He moved into an apartment in Dublin and started referring to himself on LinkedIn as an entrepreneur, which I know because someone sent me a screenshot, unbidden. I still see Poppy. That was the thing I was most afraid of losing. Danielle calls me her Aunt Ashley and she texts me pictures of Poppy's dinosaur drawings, which have become increasingly anatomically detailed for a 5-year-old. She is loud and specific about her opinions, and she insists on staying up past her bedtime to tell me things she considers urgent. And she is the best person I know. I went back to therapy, not for the first time, but for the first time in a way that felt like I was going because I genuinely wanted to rebuild something rather than just maintain the minimum. I started talking about what it meant to have spent most of my life as the person who held things together for everyone else. the one who absorbed the mess so the performance could continue. My therapist uses the word accommodation, the way you accommodate dysfunction, because disruption was always punished more than the original problem. She says that deconditioning is the real work, that knowing better doesn't automatically mean you stop reaching for the phone when the wrong person calls. I'm still working on that part. What I know now, sitting in my apartment with coffee that is actually still warm, is this. Being the person who holds things together is not a virtue when the thing being held together is a lie. I spent 29 years believing that my job was to manage the fallout from other people's choices, that if I was quiet enough and helpful enough and undemanding enough, the system would hold. It held. It just held everything in place, including me. If any part of this feels like your house, the dinners where everything is fine and also, somehow nothing is fine, the phone calls where someone needs something, and the question of how you are never quite gets asked, I want you to know that the most radical thing I ever did was learn how to let the mess sit there without touching it. To say, this is not mine to clean up, to let the consequences belong to the person who made the choices. It's not easy. It took a detective's interview room and fabricated text messages and 45 seconds of doubting my own mind to get me there. But I got there. Share this if it meant something to you. Every person who is raised to be invisible deserves to know you are not the problem. You are just the most convenient solution. I've thought a lot about the moment I almost believed him. Not the moment the detective showed up. Not the moment my mother said, "Why would Theo make that up?" The moment before all of that, sitting across from Danielle at her kitchen island, hearing what was actually in those documents, and feeling the specific weight of realizing I had driven 2 hours to do something I didn't fully understand, for someone who had never once asked me how I was doing before asking me for something. That's the moment I keep returning to. Because that's where the choice actually lived. Theo didn't lose because I was clever. He didn't lose because I outmaneuvered him, or because I had the presence of mind to record something or gather evidence. He lost because he built his plan on a version of me that no longer quite existed. The version that would absorb the consequences of his decisions without asking why. He had counted on decades of conditioning holding. And it almost did. But somewhere between his phone call and Danielle's kitchen, something in me had shifted just enough. What I understand now that I didn't then, is that the people who exploit your loyalty are rarely the ones who built it. They inherit it. Theo didn't make me into someone who said yes without asking questions. Years of family dynamics did that, quietly, one small capitulation at a time. He just knew how to use what was already there. That's not an excuse for what he did. It's an explanation of how it worked for as long as it did. It's an explanation of how it worked for as long as it did. There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't get talked about enough, and it's the intelligence of finally reading a situation correctly. Not after the fact. Not in hindsight when everything is obvious, but in the actual moment, when you're tired and confused and someone you love is telling you that the problem is your perception, not their behavior. That kind of clarity is hard-won. It doesn't come from being smart in the abstract. It comes from paying attention to the specific physical discomfort of being lied to, the way your stomach knows before your brain does, if you let yourself listen. I let myself listen in Danielle's kitchen. I sat with the discomfort instead of resolving it by agreeing. That was the whole thing. That was the entire turning point of what happened next. The courage piece took longer. Sitting in that interview room, I had to choose between the version of myself that had been told all her life she was the unreliable one, and the version that knew, with the steadiness of someone who had actually been there, what the truth was. Choosing the second version while a detective is laying fabricated evidence on a table in front of you is not easy. It requires a kind of nerve that has nothing to do with bravado. It's quieter than that. It's just, I know what happened, I know what I did and what I didn't do, and I'm not going to let someone else's story replace mine. Poppy is 5 now, and she corrects me when I mispronounce dinosaur names, which she does with the complete confidence of someone who has never once doubted that her opinion is worth stating. I want to stay worthy of being someone she grows up around. That's what keeps me honest. Not fear of consequences, not some abstract commitment to principle, but the very concrete desire to be a person that a 5-year-old with strong opinions about Carnotters can trust. We teach people how to treat us, slowly, over years, through what we accept and what we don't. I spent a long time teaching the wrong lesson. I'm still rewriting the curriculum.